the share. So I want to share some things about keeping kosher with you. And today I'm going to start with a billion symbols. If you look up kosher symbols and then you look up just the images of kosher symbols, you will find lots and lots of symbols. And some of them are dependent on countries. Some of them are dependent on locations about what's the best way of finding a kosher symbol. And I want to talk to you a little bit about finding kosher symbols, why it's important to be able to find them. And this one is kind of fun. This one shows you symbols from each state has their own. Isn't that adorable? Can have their own licensing, the Vad HaKashrut, they call it, which is the organizing committee that gets to determine what's kosher or not. But there are some basic ones that you can find. And I want to show you what isn't kosher, because we talked a little bit about that too. So sometimes it helps. These are going to probably be the most common ones that you're going to find. Yep. And this one is actually kind of fun because it's from a website that's called Go Dairy Free. So let's say you are vegan or you're a vegetarian and you want to go dairy free for whatever reason. Knowing that something is kosher can help you know if it's dairy free or not. And that's kind of fun. Even if you don't care about keeping kosher, knowing that something is kosher can help you to know if it's dairy free. So we'll get to that at some point. That's one fun thing. And the other thing I was going to share with you is this. I'm going to put it in the chat to everyone. This is a site that has a lot of good information. And there's many, many sites that you can have to find things about kashrut. But this one is from what's called Judaism 101, the website. You'll see that the address is JUFAQ, FAQ, which is frequently asked question, /kashrut. Which is what this word is over here on the top right in Hebrew is kashrut. I'm going to show you a really funny story about kashrut. This is kind of a mean thing that sometimes people were taking advantage of other people. So if I take this word and I don't put any vowels here, and these are, for those of you who are taking my Hebrew classes, we haven't learned all of these letters, but we learned some of them. So if I show you this and I don't put vowels there, that's the word kosher, right? So you would hope that if you went to a butcher and you saw that outside the butcher shop, that you would know that all the meat in there is kosher, because otherwise they shouldn't be allowed to write that. But what if what you saw had that little thing right here at the end of it? And it looks a lot like kosher, but it's not kosher. That what it says instead of kosher is basar, which means it's a butcher. It's selling basar, which means meat. So there were women who were trained. So you come to America from the old country and they could read a little bit of Hebrew or probably more likely Yiddish. And they knew that there's a symbol, that this word that looks like this means kosher. And so they knew that if they wanted to keep kosher, because it was very important to them, that they should find the store that says this on the outside. And then you get this sleazy guy who decides to put this on there instead. And they think they're eating kosher meat, but what they're eating is meat. That's just terrible. All right. So, but that's a true story. And I'm going to stop the share. We're going to talk about what it means to keep kosher. And we're going to talk about, that's right. And we're going to talk about what it means to keep kosher and why it matters, why people keep kosher. We'll talk, I hope that maybe we'll talk about why, even if you're not Jewish, why it would matter to you to know the kosher symbols and some of the laws about keeping kosher. So we're going to start off the way we did yesterday. We're going to talk about the animals that are kosher and not kosher. And the Torah tells us which animals are kosher. So the Torah explains that animals with 4 legs, we're going to start there, animals with 4 legs that have cloven hooves and chew their cud, which means that their hoof has a split in it like this, a cloven hoof, and has and chews its cud, which means it essentially eats it, and they're all herbivores. They're only going to eat grasses, but they're going to eat, and then they kind of sort of regurgitate and eat again. That's chewing its cud. They, as I understand it, have two stomachs. One does one, and then it eats it. The other next stomach eats the stuff again. But those are animals that are kosher animals. They have to have cloven hooves, and they have to chew their cud. And those are the four-legged animals. So obviously Samson and Delilah do not have cloven hooves. And obviously they're not herbivores. They do not chew their cud. They might chew their cousin, but no, I'm just kidding. But they are not kosher. Do not eat them. Neither is Bentley kosher. We're not, none of those, the fuzzy ones that we usually love, like the cat family, dog family. Horses are not kosher, but cows are, and sheep are, and goats are, and giraffes are. Lexi, you had a question about four-legged animals? Wait, hold on. Remember you're muted.
Yeah. When you went like this, showing the hoop pattern, I also know this from being a Jewish prayer symbol, and this.
Well, that's another conversation. We're going to talk about kosher. We don't have enough time to deal with kosher, but you're right. That's a priestly blessing symbol, and we'll talk about that another time. Okay, let's try to stay on track. Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't mean to. I'm not trying to be mean and take you off, but we're.
I just wasn't sure if there were two separate.
No, it has nothing to do with it. It's this. I shouldn't have even shown you that. I'm just trying to explain what I should have done. I should have done a picture of a cloven hoof, and we will. Hold on one second. So, I can do. Maybe we could do I could do a trivia game about, I should bring you to a trivia game of which animals are and aren't kosher. But essentially, you can guess which, the animals that you usually eat are kosher, like cows. So let's do the four-legged. You get it. Cloven hooves, have to chew their cud. And God mentions specifically no pork. And by the way, sorry. So I saw a question of camels. Are camels kosher? And the answer is no, camels are not kosher. So pigs are not kosher, rabbits are not kosher, squirrels are not kosher, bears are not kosher, dogs are not kosher, camels are not kosher, horses are not kosher. If that helps, okay. And there's a great story. God mentions pig, by the way, a few times, that pigs are not kosher. And there's a great story in the Talmud that talks about how when pigs sit, they don't lie down like Samson and Delilah on their side like that. They'll sit like this with their feet facing you. And you'll see that they have cloven hooves. And it's supposed to be, according to the Midrash, according to the Talmud, it's like, pick me, I have cloven hooves, eat me. But we're not allowed to eat them because they don't chew their cud. And so they represent the kind of people who are always trying to trick you. And so stay away from them. All right, so if you happen to be foul, like birds, then it's not as clear cut. It's not like chewing cud and having, wait, before we go to birds, there's some other guidelines I'd like to tell you about. In addition to the fact that there are animals that are allowed and animals that aren't allowed, there are also other guidelines. You're never supposed to have the blood of the animal. And there are guidelines about how to slaughter the animals. So we know that we're not supposed to, it turns out that the way we kill an animal to make sure that it's kosher to eat means that the animal does not feel pain and is not petrified. Most of the time, if you're eating not kosher meat, it's a situation where the animal probably had a whole lot of fear hormones running around its body before it was killed. And it may very well have been killed in a very painful way. So then there's a variety of other kinds of hormones that go into it. And so when a kosher animal is killed, first of all, it has to be a healthy animal. You can't kill an animal that's about to die and eat it. That's not kosher. When you kill an animal, a four-legged animal, you have to take a perfectly sharp knife, and there's a special way to cut it that goes straight down here so that you're hitting both of these major vein artery right here. That is a very rudimentary way of describing it. Please do not go out and try to slaughter an animal yourself based on my description just now. There are many more technical things that you have to do. But once you've done that, you then have to drain all the blood. And so there's a couple steps to the draining of the blood process. One is hanging it until the blood comes out, letting all the blood come out that way. And then you have to soak it in salt water. And you may have gone to the supermarket and found kosher salt. And that doesn't mean that there's also a place on your shelf that's not kosher salt. Like they don't make salt out of bacon or strippings. I mean, salt is sodium chloride. There's nothing not kosher about sodium chloride. But and there are blessings and processes throughout this whole thing because you want to do it in a holy way. You want to be killing this with the intention of realizing that you are taking a life and you want to honor the life of what it is. It's a sacred process to kill an animal. And so, but the salt, go back to the salt. Kosher salt is not that this salt is kosher salt and this salt is not kosher salt. It's that this salt is for koshering things. It's a verb and not an adjective. It's koshering salt. And if you notice, kosher salt has larger crystals, larger granules, and the larger granules help to absorb the blood better. They're also, if you happen to live in a climate with ice, they're also better. It's better to take kosher salt to pour on your porch so that it'll melt the ice better. But any salt that you buy, table salt, is going to have a hechsher on it most of the time, a million times. It's called koshering or kashering. And that's part of the process. So if I go to my local supermarket and I buy some kosher hot dogs, I know that it will have come from an animal that was kosher, that the animal was healthy before it died, that the animal was well taken care of, that the animal was slaughtered in a way that was not painful to it, that there were intentionalities of knowing that the animal was dying for a purpose, and that the animal, all the blood was drained from the animal before they turned it into a hot dog. I also know that if it says it's an all beef hot dog, it's all beef, that they're not going to put other things in it. And there are parts of the animal that we're not supposed to eat. And some of them are determined by looking at the rules that we used to have when we were making offerings in the temple. There were parts of animals that we weren't not supposed to eat even then, and those are not supposed to be eaten even today. And so all of those things have to happen when you have kosher meat. You want a kosher burger, it's going to have all of those aspects to it. And if you go to a place where they're selling kosher meat, like let's say you go to a deli where they're serving kosher pastrami, roast beef, something, then you know that we'll talk about this, but all of their equipment will never have touched anything that isn't kosher. All of their equipment will also have never touched anything that is dairy. Because one of the guidelines about meat is that God says in the Torah over and over again, you shall not boil a kid in the mother's milk. And by kid, it doesn't mean a human child, obviously. You cannot boil a kid in the mother's milk. And it says it a number of times. And so we try to learn. So all beef hot dogs, can they have meat from the non-kosher end of the animal? Do you mean all beef kosher hot dogs? Or you mean all beef not kosher hot dogs? All beef not kosher hot dogs can have a lot of things that are not beef and can have a lot of things that are not even meat. If you check what the FDA guidelines are, you will see. They do not answer to a higher authority. All beef hot dogs, kosher hot dogs, 100% beef from parts that are allowed to be eaten. if it's a kosher hot dog. And you know, Ballpark hot dog brand makes a kosher hot dog now. And that means that they have to have passed all of this rigorous testing. There has to be a rabbi who is called mashkiach, whose job it is to make sure that all of the guidelines are kept. It doesn't mean that there has to be a rabbi on site all the time. Hebrew National is a brand. There are a few brands of kosher hot dogs. I don't want to only talk about hot dogs, but I'm just saying something as what some people think of as mundane as a hot dog. All of these guidelines have to be followed. But it says don't boil the kid in the mother's milk. When you think about it, if a mother just had a baby kid and you're hungry and you're going to eat that kid, it is not saying you're not allowed to eat it. It is saying that when you eat it, that milk that was supposed to feed that kid should not be what you use for cooking that kid. And I don't know if it was because of a humane reason. That's a horrible thing to imagine, cooking the kid in front of the mother with the mother's milk that should have been nourishing the child and the kid, the her baby. I also don't, I mean, that's one reason that I think is a legitimate reason, and that's enough for me. Or even if that wasn't the reason, I can imagine that reason and it would be enough for me. The pagan rituals also included using milk, mother's milk, to boil the kid, their own and other kids. And so then the question comes, what if it's a cow and a sheep? What if I took the milk from one kind of an animal and I used it to boil the child of another animal? And so there comes a point where you say to yourself, that just also doesn't sound right. So we don't do that at all. We never use milk for cooking meat. And if you're never going to use milk for cooking meat, then it extrapolates to you should never have milk and meat together. I mean, what if you have, in these days, we would have had a wooden bowl or a ceramic bowl that didn't have like a good glaze on it. And if I had milk in that bowl earlier in the day and then I had meat on there, there's a really good possibility that there's still milk inside the grains of the wood. And so I am mixing some milk and meat together, and I shouldn't do that. And so we would never mix milk and meat together. You're not going to have a cheeseburger. You're not going to have a hamburger or a hot dog or a steak with a glass of milk. You're not going to do that. You can't have, a milkshake. You can't have that. So yesterday, Lexi showed us a manwich can, and the manwich can said it was kosher. It had one of those kosher symbols on it. If you used, and so here's where the no dairy question is going to come. Well, no, not necessarily. Carol, we'll talk about that in a second. Actually, so that's true. So when you keep kosher, you will not only never have a meal where there's dairy and milk, dairy and meat together, but your utensils, your plates, your pots and pans, your silverware, your stirring things, everything that you use that is used for meat will never touch anything that's dairy. And anything that you have for dairy will never touch anything for meat. You have to have two separate sets of dishes for your everyday purposes if you have meat in your house ever, or if you have dairy in your house ever. I mean, if you are someone who cannot tolerate any dairy and you only have non-dairy things, including meat, but nothing you ever have in your house is dairy, you don't have to worry about two sets of dishes. Or if you are a vegetarian and you are never going to have anything meat, you don't have to have two sets of dishes. You're only going to have two sets of dishes if you're going to be careful about never having any meat with dairy and never having any dairy with meat. And there are ways, by the way, that let's say you accidentally took a fork and it happened to be the dairy fork and you put it into your hot dog to eat the hot dog, or somebody comes into your house and doesn't know any better. There are ways of taking that fork and making it kosher again. There are some things that you can make kosher and there are some things you can't make kosher ever again. And some of the ways of making things kosher, it depends on what it is and the material it's made out of. Sometimes it's by boiling it. Sometimes it's by burying it. You'll see some ultra Orthodox with like a bunch of forks and knives in their flower pots. And you're like, what? Are they trying to plant more forks? No, that's not what it is. You can go to Orthodox neighborhoods. My sister does this. We could take a picture. We may even have a picture somewhere. And there's a store called Amazing Savings that's like a lot like Big Lots, but it also has very Jewish things in there. In addition to other stuff, there's very Jewish things. So there's, a bunch of Kiddush cups and whatever. So some of the Amazing Savings, the ones that are closest to the Jewish neighborhoods, they have a special kind of a basin, a sink kind of thing for making the utensils that they're buying there kosher. So they could take it home and use it. All right, that's another story. So we've got meat. We will never have it touch our dairy at all. We have, and we talked about kind of meat is kosher, but then we could have birds. And I guess I could ask you whether you think that if you've ever eaten birds like chicken or turkey, and I'm presuming that everybody here has at least once tried some chicken or turkey, and maybe other things. Duck is very popular in Shreveport, or quail or other things. If you've eaten birds, would you consider that meat? If you eat birds like chicken, would you consider that meat? So here's the tricky thing. If the rule is that you should never boil a kid in the mother's milk, does the chicken count as meat in that category? Am I allowed to have, a chicken lasagna if I can't have a burger lasagna? Like, can I do that? And so the rabbis determined long ago that we need to, even though there's no such thing as mixing you can't boil a chicken in its mother's milk. Although we had one guy who every time we would ask that question, he would do this. That's where you get the milk from a chicken. And we would laugh every single time he did it. And I can't not think of that every time I do it. May his memory be a blessing. But we're going to consider chicken or turkey or any fowl as meat. Now, the kosher birds are not as clearly defined as a distinction of like chewing cud and split hooves as the four-legged animals are. The kosher birds, there's a list in the Torah of forbidden birds, a few permitted birds. Some are permitted because we knew that they were offered in the temple or the tabernacle as sacrifices, as offerings, like pigeons or doves were offered. If you're supposed to offer an ox, and if you can't offer an ox because you don't have enough money, you could offer a pigeon instead. So we know that pigeons were allowed to be eaten, but we also know that there are certain birds. And here's a problem. We don't know always exactly what the right translation is for these birds. It is very possible that some of the birds that are mentioned in the Torah as being forbidden or even permitted no longer exist. And so, and we're not 100% sure, but we have a pretty good idea, and we have a pretty good idea of category. We know that the birds that are permitted we know especially that the birds that are not permitted are usually the birds of prey, like hawks and eagles, or the birds that eat carrion, like vultures, that they don't care that they're eating dead meat. And we know that we're not supposed to eat those birds. Or anything in those categories. So it's come down to kind of the domesticated, the kind of the things that you might have on a farm, like a chicken or a turkey. Turkey's not mentioned in the Torah, but by extrapolation, it's like a chicken enough that we eat the turkey. But where the rabbis long ago determined that we could have turkey, but they are considered meat. So if you're going to eat chicken, you can't have it with dairy. And you're going to put it on your meat plates. And in Yiddish, they're called fleischig and milchig. So you're going to put on your fleischig plates, and you're only going to use fleischig stuff, and you're never going to have it with anything dairy. And then we get to the things that swim in the water. The things that swim in the water have to have fins and scales, which eliminate all shellfish, crustaceans, no mud bugs, no lobsters, no clams, no mussels. None of those are kosher. Although in Louisiana, every once in a while I say that I presume that there's another guideline in Louisiana, because I don't know that I know any Jewish person practically in Louisiana. If they were born in Louisiana, I don't know almost any Jewish person who doesn't eat shrimp. There's got to be some gumbo in their background somewhere. That's only a little bit of a joke. My congregation, if you saw the cookbook that the Reform movement put out, it's mostly shrimp. So I just joke that obviously shrimp is kosher in Louisiana. I keep kosher. I do not eat shrimp. And nor do I eat mud bugs. What part of bug are you getting? Anyway, we're going to talk about bugs, but mud bugs are in the crustacean family as well, if to my knowledge, or the bug family. And we'll talk about bugs in 1 second. So something like a tuna fish is kosher. It has fins and scales. Salmon is kosher. Whitefish is kosher. But catfish, American catfish, which is almost impossible not to find in any food you eat here. If you go to any restaurant, go to a Mexican, Tex-Mex restaurant, anything, almost always one of the foods that they'll serve, the primary fish they serve here is catfish, and it is not kosher because it has fins, but it has no scales. Plus, it's a bottom feeder, and by category extension, the animals that are the garbage eaters are not good for us to eat. So it turns out, oh, and wait, there's one more category. So we talked about four-legged, we talked about birds, fowl, the things that fly or almost fly, or fish, and the things in the water. And then the last category are bugs. And so there are some bugs that are kosher, and there are some bugs that are specifically not kosher. The kind of bugs that are kosher, there are certain kinds of crickety, locusty things that are kosher. It has to do specifically with the kinds of legs they have. And my take on which bugs are kosher are just don't eat the bugs. Just don't eat the bugs. I don't care which bugs are kosher. I'm not going to eat the bugs. And I know that they make bug delicacies, and I know that you could, and there are lots of protein in them, and lollipops with bugs. I mean, and some of them may be kosher, and that's okay. I'm not going to eat them, which makes it problematic for other kinds of food. So any kind of fruit or vegetable is kosher. But you have to be really careful when you have some vegetables, like if you have a head of lettuce, you have to be really careful to open up each leaf of lettuce to make sure there's no bugs in there, because you might accidentally eat a bug. And you don't want to eat bugs. Which brings me to another situation, and that is that when you're talking about keeping kosher most of the year, if something happens and you accidentally get something in there that's not kosher, like let's say you did sit down to a salad and there was a little teensy beansy weensy bug in there, and you accidentally found just part of a teensy beansy bug, the joke about what's worse than finding, I don't want to talk about it. Some people haven't eaten dinner yet. What if you accidentally do eat part of a bug? So there's a law that the rabbis determine that was, and by the rabbis, I usually mean the rabbis from about 2,000 years ago, who were the rabbis of the Sanhedrin of the time of the Talmud, that who set down laws. Some of them were the ones who helped to write the Talmud, which was supposed to be the oral law, but they helped to determine what was laws. Sometimes they helped us to, most of the time they help us to interpret laws that may have been difficult to understand. Sometimes they do things that we call put a fence around a law, or a hedge around a law, so that you don't accidentally break the law. For example, the laws about meat and dairy, there are a bunch of fences around there. If it says don't boil the kid in the mother's milk, fine, I'll never do that. I'm never going to make boiled kid. I'm never going to, and use milk for it. Maybe water, maybe, I don't know, wine, I don't know what, but I'm never going to use milk. That's not good enough. So that because we don't totally understand the reasoning behind it, let's say, or God's intention and why, because God said it many times in Torah. So if you put a fence around that and you say never have meat and dairy together, then you can never step on whatever that actual law was. So the Battlebashing, is when you accidentally eat something you're not supposed to eat, and you are okay if the amount of the thing you're not supposed to have is less than 1/60th of the whole. So what does that mean? That could mean that, like, let's say you accidentally got a drop of milk in your chicken soup, or let's say you're slicing up meat and a bug accidentally, something like that, and you get the bug out, and then you or that, waiter, there's a fly in my soup, what's it doing? Backstroke. If there happens to be a fly in your soup, can you take out the fly and keep eating your soup if it's not a kosher fly? And the answer is yes, because it would be Battlebashing. It would be less than 1/60th of the whole. Yeah, I took it out. It doesn't mean that you should intentionally try to flavor your soup by putting less than 1/60th of some whatever shrimp flavoring or something in there. That's not good. All right. So then let me say, because I see some questions here. Yeah, the chicken processing places. I'm going back, I'm looking up some things. All right, so I'm going up, we're going to look at some of these. So hamburger helper, check the hamburger helper. If it's got, most of them have dairy in it, there's like this stroganoff hamburger helper and they blah blah blah, you can't have them. And if you check on the box, that's why I start off by showing you some of the symbols. If you look for a symbol that says that it is kosher, then you don't have to worry about it, except look for a symbol like that OU you were showing me, where you've got an O with a U inside it, which means that the Union of Orthodox Rabbis, the largest group of rabbis in the country, determine that this is kosher. If it says the OU and then the D next to it, then it means that it is a dairy product. And if you look at the ingredients and you say, look, I don't see where it says there's milk or dairy in there, you have to trust them to know that there's dairy somehow. It could be that one of the components is calcium propionate, blah, 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 something that came directly from something dairy, and that's where you got this. And you didn't know that that's what it was, but they know that that's what it is. Sometimes, and I'm not going to lie to you, this was horrible. One of the worst things that ever happened to me when it came to keeping kosher was we used to use margarine all the time, because margarine was neither dairy nor meat. And that's called parv. When something is neither, so like water, juice, that's not meat and that's not dairy. I could have that with either dairy or meat. Margarine used to be something that you could have that was neither dairy or meat. So if I wanted to make a pasta that had a meat sauce, I could take the pasta, I could put some margarine on it, and then I could eat it with one day with Alfredo sauce with my dairy dishes, of course, one day with a ragu, which means with meat sauce, kosher meat, of course, but and I could put margarine on it when it came out of the boiling water. All of a sudden, they started to show every single margarine that was available in my supermarkets had a little DE next to it, which meant that it was kosher, but it was made with dairy equipment. So that means that equipment was also used possibly for making dairy things, which means that it is no longer, it was like the fork that I use that I've only used for dairy, even after it's gone through the dishwasher, is still my dairy fork. And so that doesn't work. When Carol asked about Pyrex, if non-porous things, so let me tell you, if you have dishes that are glass, clear glass, then you can use it for milk or meat, for fleshig or milchig. Chalavi, which is dairy, or bisari, that's the Hebrew words. You can use it for dairy or meat. But Pyrex didn't always work like that. Some of them, the rabbis didn't believe were as non-porous. So if it really matters to you, then you have to look it up and figure out if your specific pattern of Pyrex is considered parv or not. If it's not considered parv Pyrex, then you have to have a separate set of Pyrex for your dairy things and your meat things. Then we get to what about fake turkey, fake cheese, fake bologna, etc. So if your food is made just with vegetable things like tofurkey or soy bologna or something like that, then it is a vegetable. And you could then, let's say, you could conceivably have a hamburger that's kosher meat and put a fake cheese on it and check to make sure that the fake cheese is not dairy fake cheese, but it's really fake cheese. It's really parved fake cheese. There's nothing dairy whatsoever in it. And you could put that on your burger and you could have a cheeseburger. You could even get breakfast strips that have only soy in them. They smell like bacon. Your whole house smells like bacon when you're finished. And put that on your cheeseburger where you have real meat, fake cheese, fake bacon. You could do that theoretically because it's really just vegetables on your burger. You could theoretically have all of the above with just pretend meat, pretend dairy. As a matter of fact, just a few months ago, there was a huge debate in the Orthodox world about whether there's this new, you've heard the Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger. There is no meat in it at all. And so most of those did get a hechsher to be considered kosher and parv. So it's not considered meat and it's not considered dairy because it's all vegetable, except when they wanted to put out I don't remember if it was, I think it was the Beyond. Anybody remember it was Beyond or Impossible? The Impossible pork. At some point, these rabbis, and I'm not lying, you could go, there's a brand called Morningstar Farms, and it's in Kroger, it's in Target, it's in Walmart, and they make what we call like phony bolognas and phony turkey, and they made a phony pork ham, phony ham. You can see this phony ham, and it says OU on it, and it's ham, but it's not really ham. It's really just vegetables. You could have that. And they did give that a hechsher, but whatever that was that stepped over the line for them about pretending to have pork that's not pork, I don't know, because there's pretend shrimp. You could have shrimp cocktail. There's a special kind of a whitefish or a cod or something that you could make taste just like shrimp and make shrimp cocktail out of it. And they do that. And there's kosher versions of that. Why? I don't know why. I mean, I think that sometimes it's because other people are doing it and you want to impress other people, or you used to not keep kosher and now you keep kosher and you miss the flavor of whatever, or you wanted to try to see if it tastes like whatever. I don't know. But you could do that. But then there's another problem. And that is, imagine that I bring my lunch in to work every day, and imagine that I had a phony bologna sandwich with real American cheese, or not American cheese. So some cheeses are problematic because they're made with rennet, and the problem of kosher cheeses and non-kosher cheeses is another story. Some ultra-Orthodox Jews will have restrictions, there's a variety of restrictions about cheeses. There's almost never going to be a cheese that you can find in the supermarket that's going to have a hechsher on it. I'm going to tell you that right now. There's almost never going to be a cheese, unless it's a fake cheese. There's almost never going to be a cheese that you can find in the supermarket that's going to have a hechsher. And so if it matters, because there is, like the Battlebashing, there's also a guideline about if it's if it's enough removed from what the original thing was, then it can be considered kosher. And who is your authoritative body as to who's doing it? But anyway, so let's just say I'm eating a cheese sandwich. Let's say it's fake cheese and it's considered kosher, and it's fake, I don't know, pick your favorite, turkey, bologna with fake American cheese on a fake bologna with white bread and Miracle Whip for Lexi, because we were picking on Lexi, her yesterday. But let's say it's all of that. And let's say you saw me eat that. What would you think I was eating? Would you think I was eating fake cheese, fake bologna, fake mayonnaise, and fake bread? Would you think that's what I was eating? Of course not. You might think that I was really eating it. And then you'll say, oh, well, if the rabbi could do that, I could do that. You saw me eating my shrimp cocktail. You thought, well, if the rabbi could eat shrimp cocktail, she did say it's Louisiana, right? Then maybe you'll eat it. So part of keeping kosher is also a little bit of being a role model. Which brings me to another thing about keeping kosher, and that is that why should we keep kosher? So I'm going to tell you that if you look at the animals that God prohibits us from eating, and the animals that God allows us to eat, you will find that the vast majority of time, the animals that we can eat are significantly healthier for us than the animals we're not supposed to eat. And it's not, so there have been many rabbis throughout the ages, including some really famous ones like Rashi, that I think it was Rashi, maybe it was Rambam, who said that they thought that the reason that God made these laws was because they were healthier, and God wanted us to eat healthy. And it's true that if you eat these things, it's healthier. Most of the time, it's going to be healthier. I am glad that when God gives me a mitzvah, when God commands me to do something, it's always a healthier thing to do. I'm very glad about that. But I don't think that that's the reason. Because if it were the reason, then I imagine God saying, come here, Jews, you could eat healthy things, but let everybody else eat crap. I don't care. I don't think that's the way God works. I don't think that God wants everybody else to eat unhealthy. And so I don't think it's a secret to keep the Jews healthy. I don't think that's how it works. What I think about the Kashrut rules is that I am a living being. I require nutrition and nourishment in order to survive. Even if I were a bug, I would need to eat something. Even if I were an amoeba, I would need to eat something as a living creature. The fact that I'm a living creature and I can make a choice as to what I eat, and the fact that God has given me guidelines about what to eat, means that every time I do this most basic natural thing, I am aware of God. I'm doing a godly thing. That's why I keep kosher. God told me to. God said, these are the foods you're allowed to eat. These are the foods you're not allowed to eat. And I can say, yeah, but I don't want to. I mean, I could say, I don't feel like keeping Shabbat right now. I feel like, mowing the lawn today. What are you going to do about it? I could do that. I could say, I don't think that's breaking law. I could do that. I could say, I had a woman, and I tell this story a lot. There was a woman who was in my conversion class. Her grandfather was Jewish, and he was a primary influencer in her life to keep her, and he taught her lots of Jewish things. She wasn't raised Jewish. She didn't think of herself specifically as Jewish when she was growing up, but she loved her grandfather, and he taught her all these Jewish values. At some point, she got married to a Christian man. She raised Christian sons, and she realized that her heart was really Jewish, and she wanted to be Jewish. So she was taking a conversion class with me, and when we talked about keeping kosher, she said, I do try to keep kosher. I try to only eat the kinds of foods I'm supposed to eat, and I try to avoid the foods I'm not supposed to eat. And my husband doesn't want to keep those restrictions. He likes whatever, a pork chop every once in a while, whatever. So I have to feed him that every once in a while. So that's in the house, but I don't have to eat that. And I have my own set of separate dishes when we're serving foods. His stuff never goes on my dishes. She said, but I think that when I look at the rules that God gave about keeping kosher, and I see how they're harvesting salmon, for example, or tuna, and I don't like how they're harvesting the salmon or the tuna. I think that the animals are going to go extinct if we keep doing this. And so I would rather not eat those fish. But I see how they farm breed catfish, and they're a lot cleaner than the kind that you get from just the bayous, and they're a lot, and they're a sustainable animal. So I think God would think it's okay for me to eat farm raised catfish, and I'm going to eat that. And I'm not going to tell her that's not kosher. I mean, she could do that. She is eating with being conscientious about God when she's eating. So then there's questions about a little bit more. We've got, can you mix tuna fish with mayo to make a tuna salad? Yes. Some of our favorite foods come from Jewish mothers who make really good tuna salads. There are questions about eggs and fish with meat and dairy. There are some people who will not eat fish with meat ever. And there are some cultures that will allow it. You will find many a Passover Seder. Passover, by the way, is a whole different set of, there's another layer of kosher for Passover that we can talk about at some point. But you will find many people for Shabbat dinner, let's say, that will have their gefilte fish, which is a whole different layer of fish. But you'll see them have gefilte fish before they'll have their chicken soup, totally separately from that. And they won't have, once they've had their chicken soup, and if they're having their brisket or even their turkey, they're not going to go back and have fish again too. Some people will not mix fish with meat or dairy. And so then, so the question Roberta asked was, are the kosher symbols equally reliable, I guess? Or, do we, are they kind of on the same bed? So rabbis sometimes like to think that their word means more than any other rabbi's word. And so you will find some rabbis who will say, oh, well, you may think that we can't eat cheese, but I say that this cheese is okay because, this amount of rennet is smaller than a Battlebashing, or this amount of whatever. I think that this cheese is okay. I think that eating impossible pork is, like they may say, look, there's nothing in it that is not kosher. So I don't see why not. And they may make it kosher and another one doesn't. And that's part of why having regional kosher symbols may be important to you. There, if you look at many brands, kosher symbol brands, it will tell you who the rabbis are that authorized it. And there will be many times that you will say, oh, Rabbi Moshe Berg, I don't trust him. I only trust Rabbi, Moshe Steen, whatever. And so there's a lot of times that you may only want to rely on certain. Well, for example, there's a K. Lots of jellos. And by the way, gelatin made with animal bones, mostly horse bones. And so you shouldn't eat gelatin. You shouldn't eat, if you want to keep kosher, you shouldn't eat gummy bears, most of them, or marshmallows. Marshmallows have gelatin in it. You shouldn't eat any of those things if you want to keep kosher, because they're made with animals that are not kosher. And an important component of their makeup is animals that are not kosher. But there's a kosher gelatin that's made with kosher fish bones. And there's actually another one that's vegan. If you can find stuff that's vegan, the 99.99% of the time, it will also be kosher, that you don't have to worry about looking up if it's kosher or not. Because if it's vegan, it means it has no kind of meat in it at all. And it has no kind of dairy in it at all. So you never have to worry about the dairy parts of it or the meat parts of it, components of keeping kosher. It will always be, which is part of why there was that website that I showed you. Because if you can, for example, Lexi showed us the bread and the bread showed that it was OU. That means there's nothing dairy in it and there's nothing meat in it. Lots of food. When Y2K came, the year 2000 hit, and we were so worried about what was going to happen with our computers and our banks and our everything else. There were questions like, what was the best thing that happened this millennium? What do you think was the best thing that happened this millennium? And at the very end of the 20th century, 21st century, I guess, the 20th century, the end of the 1990s, the Nabisco brand stopped using lard in their formulas. So the Ritz crackers and the Oreo cookies were finally kosher. That was a good thing. That was one of the best things that ever happened. Manwich sauce with fake turkey is fine. Manwich sauce with kosher turkey is fine. Mud bugs never. Friend's dad wasn't Jewish. This is to me, sorry. Yeah. And that's, so sometimes the way people live, if they live in a home where not everybody keeps kosher, certain things stay kosher and certain things aren't, which doesn't count for Passover. Passover, God has a law that says you are not allowed to eat chametz. And there is no Battlebashing. There is a zero tolerance for eating chametz or owning chametz during Passover. Zero tolerance. What is chametz? Glad you asked. It has to do with certain kinds of wheat and the fact that they rise and ferment, because the word chametz actually means ferment. It has to do with rising and fermenting, and anything else that gets stuck with them in their category. Here's a fun story for you, because they determined that there were 7 kinds of wheat that were considered chametz. And then a few years ago, thanks to our health food people, quinoa comes on the scene. Is quinoa so the kind of a wheat that you think would be chametz or not chametz? What do you know about quinoa? Do you think it should be chametz or not chametz? And so the rabbi said, it's not chametz because it's not one of the 7 kinds of wheat. So even if it looks like a chametz and it tastes like a chametz and it rises like a chametz, it's not chametz because we already determined what was chametz. So then why do the Ashkenazic Jews not allow the kitniot, the legumes, all of those peas and beans and corn and rice? That's a sad story, because by association, they were stored with the other kinds of grains that were not allowed. And so because we stored them together, we weren't allowed to eat them. Some Ashkenazic Jews are coming to their senses. Most people who convert choose not to convert and accept Ashkenazic Judaism because of that. So that's not the kind of Jew I want to be. But chametz is chametz, and it helps to look at a whole list of things that are chametz and aren't chametz before you can decide what it is, and not necessarily have use a puny English word to tell you what chametz means. That's not a good idea. So I think, does anybody else have a question? I think I've answered the questions that were in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll